It's the matrix, the matrix. And it weaves all of creation together around the consciousness pole, which is at the center connected to the divine. And this is one of the secrets of inner energy work. It often gets confused with the Kundalini channel going up the spine. They are not identical. There's a lot of hidden secret knowledge for the ancient Egyptians. The Egyptians say their mysteries were never betrayed. That means the real stuff that we knew and taught never got sent out to the public. Y'all never learned what we were really doing. Everything has a pattern on every level, and everyone should be aware of this. Until then, you're a victim of unhealthy patterns and not knowing what the patterns are. It's the hidden side of sacred geometry. Today, people often talk about sacred geometry in a very amorphous way. It's kind of like a philosophical thing. But it was a practical energy science, which is why it's so incredibly important, because it's the key to everything. It's very common that people will only work on their mental, spiritual development, and they end up really growing the energy in their upper chakras. And so their upper chakras become very big and expanded, but their lower chakras become a tiny little stick, sometimes referred to as a lollipop pattern. The other side of that is the focus very much on physical body culture, on developing energetically, on developing strength. And that's also absolutely essential. But again, that can become one-sided, to where you can meet people who have the most incredible bodybuilder bodies, but you talk to them, and there's not much going on intellectually. Now, I'm not saying that across the board at all. Those are the polarities that can exist. So some people highly developed intellectually, spiritually, other people are very developed physically, energetically. But of course, we have to have both in balance. Now, this is an ancient teaching. So in the Himalayas, they talked about Shiva and Shakti. So Shiva is ultimate consciousness, and that's the development of our consciousness to a higher level. And it's represented as an immovable center. So geometrically, it has a representation, which will make sense to us later when we get to biogeometry. So Shiva is the ultimate consciousness and creates an immovable center. Then dancing around it is the feminine polarity, which is Shakti, and Shakti is ultimate energy, and she's what weaves and creates everything, just like it's women who give birth. So that female polarity is what actually creates the world. It's the matrix, the matrix, and it weaves all of creation together around the consciousness pole, which is at the center connected to the divine. Now, the same thing is true for every one of us. We literally have a Shiva pole in the center of our body, and this is one of the secrets of inner energy work from the Chinese Taoist, from advanced levels of Kashmiri Shaivism in India and things like this. From the crown to the perineum, there is a complete column of energy that is a central pole in the energy body that everything else comes out of and grows out of. But it's the most important energy axis in the body. It often gets confused with the Kundalini channel going up the spine. They are not identical. That's connected to the back channel, and we're talking about the absolute center of the body. So there's a connection here between how we develop our consciousness and how we develop the energy body. God didn't give us one foot to hop on. He gave us a left foot and a right foot. And you step forward with one, and then you step forward with the other, and that's how you make progress in a polarized world. We're given the polarities of consciousness and energy. You cannot develop your consciousness in a stable way to a higher level without having a strong energy body to support it. The physical body and the energy body is the base of the pyramid that the capstone of the consciousness has to be on, or the whole thing will crumble. But by the same token, if you don't have the consciousness developed, then there's nothing to guide you in the proper development of the physical and energetic bodies in a way that actually does create the type of longevity that the Chinese Taoists talked about, where it was common to live to be 150 years old. So there is an essential link here where to develop the energy and physical bodies to their fullest extent, not just for short-term muscular growth, but for long-term survival as a kind of Taoist immortal, that requires a lot of consciousness development and an analytical capacity. And by the same token, to develop our consciousness, we have to have a strong, supportive energy body. And so we really need people to understand that these two things are not exclusive. And we always need to keep checking in on ourselves. There's no stones to throw. We all make mistakes. We're all figuring it out. But if for people who have only developed on the consciousness side, was something that I did for a long time, then you have to work more on the physical body integrity and the energy body. And for the people that focus more just on that side, there has to be the work on the consciousness development. Because that beautiful body that you've developed, you're not taken with you through the gate of death. What you're taken with you through the gate of death is your consciousness and your ability to perceive in non-physical worlds. So this is one of the great secrets of sacred geometry. And that is this idea about, in modern physics, they had a complete revolution in physics based on the concept of wave and particle. So before they thought, well, everything's a particle. We just keep going deeper and deeper into smaller and smaller matter, and there'll be a final indivisible little solid thing. That's what they thought in the 1800s, a little solid billiard ball of matter, and that's everything else forms from that. It's the materialistic dream. Well, that all got blown out in 1900 with the discovery of black body radiation and the quantum revolution in physics. And they said, oh, well, actually, we find out that there's both a wave and a particle. And particles, physical matter, get formed by the collapse of the wave. That's literally what they call the collapse of the wave function in modern physics. This means that our energy body is the wave, and it actually collapses or crystallizes all the forms in the physical body. Today, we analyze that in terms of things like stem cells and things like that, but the stem cells are just another part of the particle system. And what's really behind it is the wave, the outline of the human body that gets filled up with matter. The central axis in the body exists as an energy circuit in the body before the physical body ever forms. And the physical body forms around that central axis of energy. So it's not a physical structure in the body, it's an energetic structure. Now, what happened when we began to develop modern metaphysics, again with the advent of the Theosophical Society, which became the template for the modern New Age movement and modern metaphysics, is that they began to get bits and pieces of knowledge from different traditions. And we have to be aware that there's hidden secret knowledge in the Himalayas. There's hidden secret knowledge for the Chinese Taoists. There's a lot of hidden secret knowledge for the ancient Egyptians. The Egyptians say their mysteries were never betrayed. That means the real stuff that we knew and taught never got sent out to the public. Y'all never learned what we were really doing. And so they get little pieces of knowledge. So one of those things was they found about the Sushumna channel in yoga. But Sushumna, writ large, is really an interior channel along the spine that helps to move the energy up. That's very similar to what's called the governing vessel in Chinese medicine. It's quite similar. But there are some slight different structures because in reality, there is on the inside of the spine toward the center of the body, but not in the axial center, but along the interior of the spine, there's a channel of energy. There's another channel of energy that runs inside the spine. There's another one that runs, although not as well known, on the outside of the spine going up. Then there are the channels running up to both sides of the spine, the Ida and Pingala channels like you were talking about. And those channels don't only run up straight, they actually cross over, creating a caduceus pattern going up like you see in some of the Indian and Nepalese illustrations. All of this is connected to the energetic structures of the body that the physical matter forms around. And so what happened is that many traditions considered the absolute center channel of the body, what's referred to today in Taoist yoga as the thrusting channel or the Tai Chi pole, and had some other names in ancient Chinese. And then some of the knowledge coming from India. And in some of the Indian traditions, we have to be aware the Indian tradition, just like the Taoist tradition, was not one unified tradition where everybody did the same thing. It's the whole concept of Hinduism is a name for the conglomerate of a whole bunch of different sects and groups that teach things a different way, develop their energy body in different ways, but with similar core concepts of chakras and nadis, etc. Same thing for the Taoists. They have the same core concepts of the energy body, but they develop the energy body differently based on those concepts. So it's considered to be very secret that there's an energy channel running from the crown to the perineum, and that's the core energy channel of the body that interacts with, but is separate from the energy channels running on the four sides of the spine and crisscrossing on it. These are all different energy channels. So one of our fascinating opportunities today and challenges is to be able to properly put together the pieces of information from different traditions into a unified whole of the understanding of the subtle body and different practices. So if you go to any classical ancient spiritual tradition, they understood there are different levels of structure, different levels of manifestation, from the high divine level where you're connected with the one being of all things and all beings together as a unity. And then you go down to these multiple levels, given different names and different traditions, all the way down to the physical plane. And we need to understand that the electromagnetic is actually below the physical plane. It's not life energy, it's not above the physical, it's actually below it. The whole idea here is that there's a pattern behind everything. And so one of the things I describe in the Gaia series is that the ancient traditions are almost all uniform in saying where all physical structure comes from is a thought form in the mind of God, from that original unity field. It starts as a type of a thought form of a pure pattern. Then that pattern manifested the spiritual tradition as archetypal spiritual beings. Conscious spiritual beings as real as you and I, more real in some ways, much more advanced, that are an actual crystallization into conscious beingness of certain patterns and certain powers and certain functions. And then they understood that from there, you begin to form the patterns of karma, of actual physical incarnation, of what in the West and the Theosophical Society called the causal plane. Then you come down to the forming of the structures of how we understand things conceptually at the mental plane. Then it comes down to how it forms the structures of our emotional body, which is what really drives most of our behavior. And then it comes down to that wave talked about in physics of the etheric body, the chi, ki, prana level of vital life force. And that's a pure energy structure that then gives the structure that the physical matter then condenses or crystallizes around to create the physical body. And then when those life energy forces are used up constructing the physical body, they decay below the speed of light and they become the electromagnetic spectrum. So if we understand that as the basic understanding in the ancient world for how everything works, then we can understand that it's the patterns behind everything that are absolutely key. So we have to understand as we grow up from a child to an adult and start taking care of ourselves instead of somebody else taking care of us, that process of maturation in every lifetime is a type of microcosmic playing out in a single lifetime of what happens to us as a spiritual being across multiple lifetimes. We start not knowing anything, being very ignorant, and higher spiritual beings have to guide us and teach us. And then we incarnate in the physical body. We go through a whole series of those things. So our physical lifetime tends to be a microcosmic representation of the same pattern of the multiple lifetime journey. And this happens all over the place. Today we call it fractals, that this particular pattern exists on all scales of development. And so I show, for example, in the Gaia series, that something like the torus pattern. If you get a sphere, which is the primary form for holding consciousness and energy together, if you get a sphere, which is a holding form, and you open it up at the top and bottom so energy can flow through it, like an hourglass shape in the center, and then flow around the outside and then back to the center and back around the outside, that's a torus. An apple is based on a torus. You see it, how it's indented at the top and the bottom. And then the core of it with the seeds is right in the center line, the same as our central channel in the body. Once you start to perceive these patterns, you see how everything is connected, and it's the same basic patterns that rule everything. The torus exists from the subatomic level. We have photographs of toroidal structures subatomically up to galactic levels that have toroidal structures. This is the idea of scale invariance, that regardless of how big or small the scale is, the same pattern is the key pattern to create the energy flow. But the same thing is true for us emotionally and mentally. All of us, I think, have had the experience where we grow up and we have these tremendous yearnings, emotional yearnings. Where's our missing half? Where's the person we're going to unify with? Where's all of my romantic aspirations I was taught to have as a young child, taking in media about that perfect partner I would have that would make my life complete? And we had that emotional yearning. And then through the school of hard knocks, with some relationships that maybe didn't work out well and we were very naive in, and we got knocked around, we began to say, oh, I better figure this out. And then we begin to see patterns. I have certain patterns of behavior I didn't know that screw up my relationships. I see dysfunctional patterns in other people, and maybe I can handle that in this person, but I don't want to deal with it in this person. It's just too dysfunctional. So we start seeing those patterns at the emotional level. Same thing at the mental level. How do I put my life together? How do I divide my time in the day? What's important and not important to me? Everything has a pattern on every level. And once you begin to understand these patterns, the same thing is true on the spiritual levels. There are patterns to how spiritual beings work and operate. And this is going to be important for us because when we pass through the gate of death, if we don't have some understanding for how spirit operates and we haven't developed any organs of spiritual perception, we're as deaf, dumb, and blind spiritually as Helen Keller was in the physical world, where she had to be guided around everywhere. And that's why you see these pictures in the old Egyptian tradition, like from the papyrus of Ani, which we know as the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and is better called the Book of Coming Forth into Light. That in that you see Ani, who's the initiate being trained, he's like bent over, hunched over. And he's got this greater being holding his hand and guiding him through these worlds that he's not able to navigate through or understand himself yet. That's what happens to every human being. Our goal is to develop to where we understand the patterns. You have a healthy body once you understand the patterns that make a healthy body. Until then, you're a victim of unhealthy patterns and not knowing what the patterns are. Same thing with your energy body. They have strong, vital force. You have to understand what the principles are for feeding that, both through the food we take in, through breathing practices, exercise, a whole variety of things. The emotional body being healthy, and you actually have a life that's emotionally full and fun and joyous rather than a constant misery. Mental life, knowing how to control your own mind so your mind doesn't destroy your life, but your mind becomes a superpower. All these things are based on the knowledge of pattern. That's such a great topic because, again, this is one of those things that should be Metaphysics 101 for people, but a lot of people never got. We don't get issued our Metaphysics 101 books, but whatever we happen to be exposed to in the world around us today, which is not always the most important information. So the key of everything is that, and all classical traditions agree on this, that everything came from a unity, the one. Now, in modern materialistic physics, they describe that state of unity, the one, where there is no polarity, there is no duality, everything is unified. They refer to this as the singularity. That singularity, according to physics, that unified state, which they don't understand anything about, they admit, is the source of all creation because that unity, the one, split into polarity, the two. And then our whole world is based on polarity. Positive and negative charges with the electron and the proton. Positive and negative charges in electricity and magnetism. The opposites attract and the same repel. That's a universal principle that you'll see anytime you get a bar magnet, try to put the two similar poles together. They repel each other. You can feel something that feels like a gelatinous force field pushing them apart. And you get the two opposite poles and you can't keep them apart. They want to be together. So what polarity does is it allows things to be separate, but energetically moving with each other, energetically affecting each other. That allows evolution. That allows dynamic development. Evolution as a spiritual being is only possible in a polarized world, in the school of hard knocks, here on the physical plane. And that's why we're sent here to a polarized world. Otherwise, we often, when we're suffering in the physical world, say, I just want to be back, in that blissful unity state that I came from, that we all subconsciously know exists and we subconsciously yearn for, and then sometimes dysfunctionally try to attain through things like opiates or things that put us in that state but destroy our physical lives. But we have a subconscious yearning for it, and that yearning can sometimes be addictive. We have to understand the reason for being here on the physical plane, or for actually having the internal fortitude to grapple with the polarized world, where we may suffer and we may not get what we want, but it's part of developing to a higher level than we were before. So everything is polarized, everything is split here. And so when the ancient knowledge of energy science from the old traditions got lost, it was reclaimed to begin with by French researchers in the early 1900s. The Chinese knew a lot about it, the Indians knew a lot about it, all these ancient cultures worked with it, but the people that we found that knew it the most was ancient Egypt. Ancient Egyptians mastered the art of what they called shape-caused waves. These are the subtle energy waves coming from any geometric form or any shape. It's the hidden side of sacred geometry. Today, people often talk about sacred geometry in a very amorphous way. It's kind of like a philosophical thing. But it was a practical energy science. Biogeometry is reclaiming the practical energy science side of sacred geometry, which is why it's so incredibly important, because it's the key to everything. So Dr. Karim took that stuff back to Egypt, began to work with it, and he has an incredibly important mental question with this. He said the French identified all of the polarized energies that make up the life energy functions in the world. Everything inside your own energy body that creates every function you possibly need, whether it's more yin or more yang, or all these different types of functions. He said, but this is always shown by the French as a circle. And on the outside of the circle are all these different bands of energy. And again, one of them might activate this organ, and this other one will sedate this organ. They all have different energies, and they're polar opposites to each other. And he said, but they're not asking what's in the center of the circle. And so he, with this kind of brilliant Alexander the Great breaking the Gordian knot type of thing, he used this lateral thinking And he said, in addition to the bands of polarized energies, all these bands have opposites, that the French discovered there's got to be something in the center that's a universal harmonizing energy that's not polarized. This is the energy from the original unity state, because the original unity state broke into the polarity that made up everything in our world. Two opposite genders, yin and yang, light and dark, hot and cold, all that stuff. So he's like, the French have mapped out all the polarized energies of the polarized split as it pertains to human life energy. But what about that unified field force, that original energy of the singularity, that divine state in the center? And he actually then identified, using the French bands, particular energy bands that resonated more strongly with the center than others, particular sub-bands in the whole system. And that's what developed the concept BG3. In his initial work, he discovered 3 precise sub-bands within the 12-band system of the French that we use for practical purposes. It's not that hard to learn. Today, in the biogeometry advanced training, we'll teach people 28 sub-bands that resonate very strongly with the center. But we have to understand that these are where that center energy resonates with the polarized energies on the periphery very strongly, but in itself is a unity of the one in the middle. It has no duality or anything else. And what Dr. Karim found is that he could directly tap in to that unified field force, the universal harmonizing energy of the BG3, and that would harmonize and balance all other energies in existence. All the other energies that exist with all the other polarized bands, they get unified, tied together in the center, and harmonized. To harmonize all these different energies we have in our body and energy field, without the harmonizing force, everything just becomes chaos, and it just tears apart at every level of creation, including in the human body. But if you can amplify that harmonizing energy, everything improves. Everything gets better. It's the universal donor. That harmonizing energy of the BG3 is the only energy in existence, which comes from the divine plane, the original unity, that you cannot overdose on. So he created then, Dr. Karim created an entire system of biogeometry. This concept from the French of the shape-caused waves, where geometric forms emit particular energies of the bands, or if you know how to modify them, can actually emit the energy of that harmonizing universal field force, which Dr. Karim figured out how to do, and created the entire system of biogeometry. So biogeometry is about the effect of shape-caused waves and geometric energies on life forces.